Hi, good morning, and welcome to the Predictive Analytics and Customer Experience webinar. I'm Katie Robbert, CEO of Trust Insights, and I'm going to walk you through how to use predictive analytics at every stage of the customer experience. So first, let's set the stage a little bit. We've all sat in those meetings with a manager or a team member or an executive who thinks that they know what the customer wants. So they'll say things like, I know best and I know what the customer wants and we need to do it this way. And you're sitting there thinking, but we haven't looked at any information, or I don't remember the customers telling us that that's what they want. And so we've all been there. This happens a lot. It's a chronic issue that happens at all companies. It's not unique to just yours if you are experiencing it. And so the reason we're talking so heavily about the customer experience is that according to the most recent CMO survey, published in February of 2020, is that spending on customer experience is expected to continue to grow upwards of 35% over the next 3 years. And so when you think about that, the customer experience is really just making sure that you are giving your customers what they want, and so that you can attract the right kinds of customers. So the customer experience is arguably one of the most important pieces of your company, because without customers, you really don't have much of a company, because ultimately, at the end of the day, somebody needs to purchase your services or your products. So, what is the problem with the customer experience that companies face today? Well, the issue is that we need to know who our customers are. We need to know where our customers are. We need to know what the customer wants, and we need to know when the customer wants it. And so, those are four very important key questions, but they're also complicated questions to answer. And so, what is the solution to this problem? Well, the solution is predictive analytics. And so, with predictive analytics, you can anticipate your customers' needs. You can be proactive and not reactive, meaning that you can have a plan for when things are going to happen and not just say, oh my goodness, things are on fire. You can know where to spend your money and when, and you can know how to reach your customers when they are interested. And so predictive analytics is a form of artificial intelligence. And so we know from that same CMO survey that the top uses of AI in marketing are going to be content personalization, predictive analytics for customer insights, programmatic advertising and media buying, and improving marketing ROI by optimizing marketing and content and timing. And so when you think about it, all of these things point back to the customer experience, giving people what they want when they want it. Now, why is this so difficult for all of us to do? Well, we can also see that the actual use of data in making decisions is pretty low. In February of 2019, the number of companies using data to make a decision had hit an all-time high at a whopping 43.5%. And yes, there is sarcasm in that statement, because more companies should be using data to make decisions. And now, a year later, only 37.7% of companies are using data to make informed decisions. This is really problematic. And you're probably saying to yourself, well, that's silly. Why is that? Well, let's walk through very quickly the data analytics hierarchy. And so this is the structure of data that should exist within any given company. And so you start at the bottom and read the way up. And so you have your descriptive data, the what happened. That's your quantitative data. That's your number of website visits. That's your revenue data. That's your goal completion data. It's your numeric data that tells you what is going on. Then you have your diagnostic data. Why did it happen? So this is your customer research surveys, your call center data, your market research, the behavioral data, the qualitative data that helps you understand why somebody made the decision that they made. Then you can move on to predictive, what will happen, and that's what we'll be focusing on today. And then you have the more advanced machine learning techniques, which are prescriptive. What should we do about the things that we see are happening? And then the proactive, which a lot of companies are really far away from, which is, can a machine do it for me? So you would take all four of those stages, plug it into a machine, and that would be the deep learning, where the machine would just spit back out, here's your plan. Now, most companies, unfortunately, are stuck at this bottom rung, and that's why they're not using data to make decisions. And so they either don't have the structure set up, they don't have the software, or they're collecting so much information, they don't know where to focus of what happened. How many people visited my website? How many goals were completed? How many people liked us on social media? How much money did we bring in? And you would be surprised, but those are sometimes the most difficult questions to answer. And so until you can master this bottom rung of the data analytics hierarchy, you really can't move on to the other stages of diagnostic and predictive analytics. And so getting your house in order first is the name of the game. And so with descriptive analytics, you have to have really good data quality. And there are 6 C's of data quality. So you have to have clean data. So it's prepared well, free of errors, and complete, no missing information. And so we're going to talk about the anomalies in just a second. But in order to run a good predictive forecast, you have to have those first 2 steps mastered. So no missing information, clean information, and then it has to be comprehensive. And so it has to cover the question being asked. So if you're looking at website visits, but you're trying to sort out how much revenue you're going to have, how much revenue you're going to bring in, you might have a mismatch. And so make sure you're looking at the right kinds of data set. And then it needs to be chosen. So no irrelevant or confusing data, making sure that there's not additional junk thrown in just for the sake of having it. It has to be credible. So making sure that you have a well-documented methodology, or if you're using external data sources, that you can see their methodology of how they are collecting the data in a valid way. And so basically it boils down to that the data is not just being made up. And then calculable. So you must be able to work with the data. And so the first 5 C's are important, but if you can't actually analyze the data, then there's really no point. And so those are the 6 C's of data quality that you need to have for that first rung of the data hierarchy. And that then feeds into understanding your customer experience. And so within the customer experience, you can use all of that quantitative data to figure out what happened. And so the customer experience is broken down into a couple of different parts. It's the buyer's journey, which is awareness, consideration, and evaluation. And then the owner's journey, which is purchase, ownership, and loyalty. And then you have that last phase of evangelism, where they're starting to help spread the word of mouth, they're selling for you. A lot of companies focus only on the first 4 stages of the customer experience, which is completely acceptable. And that's awareness, consideration, evaluation, and purchase. And that right there is actually a lot of really good information that's going to help you understand your customer experience. So we're going to walk through all of the phases of the customer experience and how you can use predictive for each one. And remember, the goal is not to predict. The goal is to change behavior, to change outcomes. And this is really important to remember because there are some caveats about predictive analytics. I usually save this towards the end of the presentation, but because of what's going on in the world right now, I really want to make sure that it's clear what you can and can't do with predictive, and how being in the middle of a global pandemic affects your predictive forecast. And so just some quick caveats. You can't predict the unexpected. So these are the quote unquote black swan events, things that we never really as a community saw coming. You have to use human judgment. And so there's this misunderstanding about artificial intelligence that it's a set it and forget it. But once the information comes out, and that's really all it is, it's math, it's data, it's statistics, you still have to use human judgment to say, this seems right, or this isn't going in the right direction. And so you then have to look at the outcomes to say, this is what I want it to be. There has to be some level of scenario planning. And so just picking one lane, going down it, and not deviating from it, keeping your blinders on, is not the best way to use a predictive forecast. You can run a few different scenarios because, again, predictive is not a crystal ball. It's not magic. You're not predicting exactly what is going to happen. A predictive forecast is a guidepost. It's a guiding light to point you in the right direction. A little bit more about what you can't predict. And so I mentioned you can't predict things that haven't happened. And we are in our, quote unquote, buzzword bingo, our unprecedented times. You can't predict things that are unpredictable. Believe it or not, you cannot forecast the presidential election. And what that means is down to exactly every little piece that's going to happen. You can get, that prediction of what is likely to happen, but until the thing happens, you can't actually predict because no 2 presidential elections have been the same. You also can't predict things that have too many hidden inputs. And so the stock market is a really great example of this. So there are so many different factors that affect the outcome of the stock market going up, the stock market going down, including the cost of oil, the cost of goods and trades, and all of those different things. They're sometimes independent of each other. And so there's too many inputs to be able to predict the stock market. Trust me, people have tried, they're still trying. But it's just not something that you can accurately say, this is exactly what is going to happen. And then you can't predict anomalies. And so we're in the middle of an anomaly right now. If you look backwards in history, you couldn't have predicted what was going to happen on September 11th. So on September 10th, people sitting around saying, I'm sure some sort of, you know, global crisis is going to happen tomorrow, and here's everything that's going to happen as an outcome of it. There may have been early warning indicators, but there was no way to really say this is exactly what it's going to be. The same with housing market crashes. And then, of course, the best example is what we're in the middle of right now, the 2020 global pandemic with the coronavirus. It has hijacked all of our data sets to really do any sort of good predictive forecasting. And so a concrete example of that is if we look at the FRED database, so the Federal Reserve Economic Data, which gives information on employment. So you can see this data set goes from 2015, 2016, and so on and so forth to 2020. And you can see in 2020, when the global pandemic started to affect all of us, well, there's your data anomaly. So if you're using a data set like this to project forward what the trends are, you have to factor in that you're going to have anomalies, especially in 2020. And so we'll get into a little bit more of what that looks like as you're going through every phase of your customer experience. So how does the predictive analysis work? It's kind of like a map. Again, it guides you to where you want to go. This is the formula for running a predictive model. Now, if you're not a mathematician or a statistician, this isn't going to mean a whole lot to you, and that's okay. But I want you to have a general high level understanding of how an ARIMA model works, which is what this is, an auto regressive integrated moving average with seasonality. And so if we think about a predictive forecast like a map, think about your Google mapping software or Waze or MapQuest or any other software that you've used to get you in real time from point A to point B. So if we start to break down the ARIMA model, we start first with the averages. And so the first thing you do is you plug in your destination from where you're starting. And so if I'm going from work to a customer meeting, or if I'm going from my house to an appointment, then I'm going to say, I want to go from here to here. What you're going to get back is information based on what other people have done. And so, on average, it takes other people taking this same route about 15 minutes, or it takes other people taking this other route about 21 minutes, or on average. And so, that's the average part of the ARIMA model. So, then you actually have to get on the road, whether you're walking or biking or driving. It's nearly impossible for two people to move at the exact same pace. And so the first set of information you're giving is based on the average speed limit. So if the speed limit on the highway is 65, what happens if you're going 66 miles an hour or 64 miles an hour? The information, the data, the outcome is going to change. And that's the moving part of the average. So you have to factor in the velocity. And then next, you have the auto regressive part of the ARIMA model. And so, for example, yesterday, I was driving home on the highway and my GPS said 10 minutes away from home. Well, all of a sudden, everybody on the highway came to a complete stop. And the time limit on my GPS said, oh, there's a stop on the highway. Now it's going to be 15 minutes. And so it's constantly taking in real time information in order to update the formula. And so my 10-minute drive went to a 15-minute drive. But then the accident or whatever it was that was happening on the highway cleared. And that's the integrated part of the ARIMA model. So I went from 10 minutes drive with everything clear to 15 minutes with everybody stopped, but then everybody started moving again and it shaved off 2 minutes. And so it was a 13-minute ride instead. And so the information is constantly being pulled in to give you the most accurate prediction of what might happen based on the information, based on the data you can feed to the model. So then you have to factor in seasonality. Now, I live in New England, and so when it snows, people slow down. When it rains, people slow down. When it's sunny, people slow down. Basically, people in New England can't drive. And so we always assume that weather is some kind of a predictor of that. But really, depending on where you are in the country, you need to factor in seasonality. So we know that snowstorms cause traffic to slow down, so you're not going to get someplace as fast as you want to. Uh, Solar glares or rainstorms or windstorms, whatever the thing is, you need to factor that into your model. And so also think about it in terms of the holiday season. So typically on the 4th of July holiday, you have a lot more traffic because people are going to vacation homes. Same thing with Memorial Day, same thing with Labor Day. So factor those times of the year into your model because you're not going to have an identical 365 days over a 1 year span. It's not the behavior is going to be different. So that's how predictive analytics works in a nutshell. So let's talk a little bit about how you can use a predictive forecast at every stage of your customer experience. And so, as I mentioned, this is the full customer experience, but a lot of companies focus only on the first 4 steps. I'm going to show you examples of how you can use it through every stage, but think about it in terms of what your customer experience looks like. So if we start at the top with awareness, this is when potential customers are first finding out about you. So with awareness, you would want to use general search traffic or traffic to your website. In this example, what we've done is we've taken what we call the cheese of the week forecast, and we've taken over 100 different kinds of cheeses using Google Trends data. Now, Google Trends is a marketer's best friend. It's a free application where you can pull existing search traffic up to, I think, back to 2004 or so. So it's pretty extensive. And so we looked at all of the different kinds of cheeses, and what we can see is that roughly in August, burrata cheese is the type of cheese that people are going to care the most about. Not so much cheddar cheese or Romano cheese. And so what this means to us as marketers is that we would want to make sure that when August rolls around, we have all of our content about burrata cheese outlined and written and posted and published. And then it's also SEO optimized so that when people are looking for it in those August timeframes, they're finding it. And then you can also do more forward planning to say, well, we know in October, Oaxaca cheese is going to be the thing that people care about and not so much mozzarella cheese. And so then that gives you that time frame buffer to get things done ahead of time so that Google has time to index it, so that when people are looking for the types of services or products that your company offers, they're finding it. So then the next stage is consideration. So they found out about you, and now they want to know a little bit more about what you do. So they might sign up for your newsletter, they might start to download content from your website, or they might continue to return to your website over and over again, looking at different parts. And so if you look at, for example, your email marketing data, if you've been up and running for a few years, you probably have a couple of years worth of good, clean email marketing data. If you don't, you can get Google Trends data. So what the analysis that you're looking at here is we took a look at out of office. So when were people setting up their out of office notifications, which to us indicates that people are going on vacation. And so you can use a forecast like this to say, this is when I should and shouldn't be sending out emails because people are checking their email or they're not. But if you have your own set of email marketing data, you can plug in your own historical information to say this were the open rates, and this is our best performing newsletters, our least performing emails, to try to start to plan out when you should and shouldn't be sending your email. So the next phase of the customer experience is evaluation. So they found out about you, they've gotten a little bit more information, and so they're ready to start to do the dance with you. So they want to maybe say, you know what, I'm going to raise my hand and say, I want to buy something from you, or I want to learn more. So this is when you can start to look to your CRM data of what does your pipeline look like? What is the seasonality of it? When do new leads come into our CRM? And so what you might see is that you are really strong at getting new leads into the pipeline in Q1, but then in Q2, they tend to drop off. So what you can then do is start to build plans around how can we prevent some of that drop off in Q2, which then moves you on to the purchase phase of the customer experience, which might be the most exciting phase for all of us because it's when people spend money with you. So then you can start to look at your revenue data, your e-commerce data. So thinking about that example of evaluation and when leads come into the pipeline, you might start to see some patterns such as in Q2, our revenue really spikes, but in Q3, our revenue drops off. Well, that's because we know that from running the trends, the predictive forecast, Q1 is when we get leads, therefore in Q2, that's when we bring in the revenue. So you can start to put those puzzle pieces together so that you can understand we need to double down in Q2 to bring in more leads so that in Q3, our revenue doesn't drop off. And then you can start to plan around those timeframes. So once a customer has become a customer, once someone's become a paying customer, they then have ownership over the service or the product. So this is where your customer service information can come into play. So you can start to run a forecast based on your historical customer call center data of when call volumes or customer service complaints are going to spike and when they're going to drop. So one of the things that you can do with that is you can say, we know that these times of year we need to have people staffed up and trained up. And when it tends to be a little bit lower, that's where you can focus on professional development or really digging into the data into a deeper level of, the quantitative, the qualitative, what are people saying, what are they doing? But so you can start to work with those, highs and lows of when people are calling and when they're not. Then you have the loyalty phase of the customer experience. And so this is when they might start to repurchase your products and give you that customer satisfaction data, or there's NPS scores. So you can look at your renewal data. You can start to see, okay, we know that customers tend to repurchase their products in this time of the year, or end of year is really popular for people to renew their contracts because we go annual contracts. Are there any other things that we need to consider in order to get people to renew or raise those renewal rates? And then lastly, the last stage of the customer experience is evangelism. And so this is when they really start to do some of the legwork for you, and they'll leave those reviews on Yelp or Google or your website or social media. And then you can also look at the sentiment. So for example, if you start to run a predictive forecast around the volume of reviews you get, but then you see, in addition, with the volume, that the reviews are mostly negative, well, that's really something interesting to dig into of what's going on. And is there a pattern to this? Does it always happen where number of reviews goes up and the sentiment goes down? You may also work in a seasonal industry such as the tourism industry, which right now is a little bit shut down. But if you take, for example, I live near Cape Cod, so a lot of shops are only open in the summer. You would expect reviews to go up in the summer and likely the sentiment to go up as well. So what can you as a business owner to do to make sure that people have year-round information so that they're always finding you for something? So that was a quick overview of how you can use a predictive forecast at every stage of the customer experience. So the customer experience that I just outlined has 7 different stages. So where do you start? It's really daunting to try to run a predictive forecast for every single stage of this at the, when you're new to it. So what I would suggest is think about it. This customer experience is really just your sales funnel. And so what you can do is you can look at the conversion from step to step. So if you have really great awareness and SEO and really great content, you can bring people to your website. But then at the consideration stage, they tend to drop off. Then you can start to figure out, all right, I need to do some predictive forecasting with how many people are returning to the website, or what is the likelihood that they are going to download some content, and those kinds of things. So take it one stage at a time and figure out where your sales funnel is the weakest, and that's where you can start doing your predictive forecasting. Now, there is a process to follow, and essentially it's basically just project planning. So the first thing you would want to do with a predictive forecast is set the strategy, a goal, a desired outcome. What is the question that we are trying to answer by running a predictive forecast? And having that set at the beginning will dictate how the rest of these tasks go. So once you know what the question is you're trying to answer, you can extract the data from where it lives. We've talked a little bit about how we're in this anomalous time with the global pandemic. So if you have historical data prior to February 1st of 2020 or January 1st of 2020, then you can use that data to start to do some predictive forecasting, knowing that it's going to be a little bit incomplete, but it's going to give you sort of just a general sense of what's going on, because anything from February 1st forward, so March data, April data, you're going to have a lot of these anomalies in it because we are in the middle of this global crisis. Now, if you don't have your own data, there are external data sources. So I've mentioned Google Trends, you have the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which again, proceed with caution because of where we are in the world right now. If you're trying to use data up until today's date, for example, you're going to have a lot of anomalous data, and you just have to be prepared to work with that. I would highly recommend just sort of maybe using up until only February 1st if you need to use that data at all. So then you need to prepare it. So this essentially is just making sure that your data is in a format that you can work with. And so this is likely a CSV file or something in SQL or a text file. So just making sure that it's clean, that there's nothing missing. Think back to those 6 C's of data quality, and that you have really good, well-prepared data so that when you run your predictive forecast, it's a very easy, straightforward process. So then you pick which variable you want to predict against. And so this should all come from your initial project planning of what is the question that I'm trying to answer. So if you're trying to understand visitors come to the website in the awareness phase, you're not necessarily going to pick a revenue variable. And then you run the prediction. So this is the fun part. So you run it through your system, you have the process, and then you understand, like, here's what the trends is going to look like. And so from there, you can build a plan of action from the forecast. Just a quick customer story. I used to work with a large UK company who was trying to break into the American market in the health and wellness space. And so they were spending upwards of 6 figures a month on social media ads around terms such as South Beach diet, or bikini body, or whatever the things were that went along with the health and wellness space. And so my team, week over week, was running the same awareness predictive forecast to understand the trends of what kinds of things people would be searching for and when. Unfortunately, they didn't use our predictive forecast, and lo and behold, they got really poor return on investment. They ended up spending a lot of money not getting people to sign up for their program, and ultimately we decided to part ways because they weren't getting what they thought they needed, and we weren't able to get them to use the data to make a decision. On a more positive note, we do have a case study where we had a publishing website, a B2B website, and we actually used that same awareness type of predictive forecast. And so we created content when people were going to care about it. We did the SEO optimization. We made sure that it was up on the website ahead of when those trends were going to be hitting. And what we saw year over year is that we were able to drive up users 18%. Well, that's pretty great. But even more great is that it resulted in a 285% increase in conversion and a 248% increase in revenue. And so those are numbers that you should feel very confident taking back to your manager to say, look, with a little bit of planning, here's what we were able to do with our website, with our revenue, with our conversions. So this is a really great example of just the awareness phase of the customer experience. So where can a predictive analysis go wrong? Well, with a lack of planning. So again, think about what is the question that I'm trying to answer, and what stage of my customer experience or my sales funnel needs the most help, and start there. So create that plan and really focus in on where is my time best spent right now. Not having great data quality. So we've been talking a lot about the global pandemic and what you can't predict. So just, you can still run a predictive forecast right now, but proceed with caution because there is a lot of anomalous and dirty data out there that is going to affect the outcome of your predictive forecast. So just be aware of the different caveats that we've talked through. Having a lack of follow through. So you create the plan, you run the forecast, and then it just sits there. Well, that's a lot of wasted time and energy. So before you run a predictive forecast, as part of your planning, make sure that you have the resources to execute and take action on what the trends are that you're seeing. And then ultimately, a predictive forecast can go wrong if you're trying to do too much too soon. And so again, I walked through 7 stages of the customer experience, but you can just pick one to focus on to start, to test it out, run a proof of concept, and demonstrate this is how it works for us in our company. So, in a nutshell, a predictive forecast is not a magic ball, crystal ball, rather, a magic ball. I'm not really sure what that is. Maybe a magic eight ball, but it's not going to tell you exactly what's going to happen. It's going to guide you in the direction of the actions that you should take in order to get the best results out of your customer experience. And so, with that, I thank you for your time. If you want to continue the conversation or have additional questions about how to use a predictive forecast for the customer experience, you can join me in my free Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. And with that, I thank you for your time today.
Want help solving your company's data, analytics, and digital marketing problems? Visit trustinsights.ai today and let us know how we can help you.